All right, what's up, guys? It's Mark Politics, aka Prophet Incel, here today. We're continuing a part two of the debate with Chase Shepard. Back where we left off, we were talking about how any arbitrary line you draw about why African Americans are poor are inconsistent. Therefore, it would have to be racism.
Well, I actually just want to start out
Sure.
by kind of proving that wrong
Sure.
because after that debate, I kind of did just a little bit more
Yeah.
research
Sure.
to
Sounds good.
um, but here we go. Okay, so recently, I don't know when,
Okay.
Harvard did a study, and it shows that blacks living in the same household incomes as white males, black males living in the same household incomes as white males, were actually underperforming against their white counterparts in the same neighborhoods as well. But
Sure.
you can't say that's racist, but because black women are better, uh, are better than white women in the same circumstances in the households, which therefore means there are more factors than just racism. So,
Well, when we're doing this cross sex, we can actually we can do that. That's fine. But when you say are doing better, what do you mean by doing better? Are you meaning like making more
like
money?
financially and like yeah, money.
So when you say that black women who stay home are doing better than white women staying home, are you saying that black women staying home are making more money than white women staying home?
Not staying home in the same
Oh, do you just
household.
mean like working in general?
Yeah.
Well, that could make up for different confounding variables because sometimes black women would either need to work more, and the reason they would need to work more is because, like I was talking about, single parent households. When the woman has no like man supporting her or help supporting her, she has to do it on her own, right? And when we're talking about how they ended up in these situations, right? There's a lot of different disparities and things like that. So, why? I guess I'll just tie this back again so we can go back to it. Why do you think African Americans are poor in America? Like disproportionately, like African Americans? Because like
Well,
Nigerian immigrants come over and they're doing fine, right? So I don't think it has to do with coming to America black. I think it has to do with the history of being black in America.
that study kind of shows some of it because
That what does it show? So it's saying that white men are doing better than black men, but black women are doing better than white women.
no, it's just showing that in okay, blacks are poorer in the United States.
Yeah,
And okay, let's say that they started off in the same household with the same income, like in the same households, same incomes in the same type of neighborhoods. It shows and it proves that white men are um, are more likely to make more money after that than
sure,
black men and be better financially stable. So
sure.
I'm not saying it's because blacks have less of a work ethic or anything like that.
Sure.
I'm just saying that kind of proves some of it
Well, it
because
doesn't really prove a lot of it, and here's why. So you're saying that white people and black people in the same situations, however, mostly the case, they're not in the same situations. African Americans are disproportionately in the lower class, right? So you can make these claims about them being in the same situations. However, mostly they are in different situations most of the time. So you can make the claims about when they're in the same situation, but I could honestly care less if they're in the same situation or not, right? I care if they're in different situations and why they're in that different situation, right? So why do you think they're in that situation disproportionately rather than white people in the lower class?
why do you think it is? Do you think it's because of
I think it's because of systemic racism and policies like the Great Society Act and redlining that have effects today, but I want to know why you think that is.
but do you think it's because of the inheritance? Do you think it's because that
Not necessarily, no.
okay. Well,
Do you think that? Because if you were
no,
to
I don't.
argue inheritance, then yeah.
No, I
Okay,
don't.
good.
I don't think that at
I
all.
think in some cases, if your grandparents were rich, or if your parents are rich, they can pay for your education, which has a lot to it. Because I think are your parents going to pay for your education? I know mine are.
No.
Because
I
in
mean,
most,
they're not going to pay for all of
do you
it.
pay? Do they pay for your education right now?
Yes,
Yeah.
but education in middle school doesn't cost that much. So
Well, I mean, in some places it's 30,000 a year. Like especially near where I live, it's like $30,000.
that's like well, that's like Christian schools, like private
Yeah,
Christian schools.
private Christian schools. Yeah.
I don't. go to a private Christian school. So
All right, well
anyway,
that's fine. They still like pay for it, so that's all I need to get from that. But why do you think that is? Like
what
if not everlasting like racism or some sort of racism, why are African Americans way poorer, doing way worse, doing drugs more, things like that, and in gangs more, things like that? Why do you think that is?
Well, I think some of it is just, frankly, bad decision making. That's not all of it,
Well,
but
okay, so then what's the other part? Because I think arguing bad decision making is a bad argument because you can't just argue that black people are less smart than white people. That
they're,
leads them to worse choices.
they're not. They're not. I mean, I'm
Well,
not
then
saying
how do you make less choices on average but be the same amount of smart?
you can be a very smart person. Very smart people
Sure.
can end up doing drugs. I mean,
Yeah,
just
but on
because.
average, why would it happen like way more? You can't argue that's coincidence, right? If it happens way more, then you can't argue coincidence.
Well, it's. I don't think
You
it's.
can't make a metaphysical absolute claim based on a speculation.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I'm just saying. Well, that kind of ties into your saying that. Basically, by you saying that, you're saying that just because, let's say, this white person's
Mm-hmm.
grandparent back in the 1960s or 70s, just because
Sure.
he had more money, means that almost automatically that's what you're saying.
No, I didn't say
That
that. I actually said I didn't really want. I said I didn't really agree with the inheritance. You're kind of misrepresenting what I said. I said I didn't agree with that, and then I said,
it's not all
quote.
about inheritance, it's
Yeah,
about.
that's what I said. I said I didn't say that.
Well, okay.
Yeah, so that's
So
a straw man because I didn't even say that. You asked me if I thought they're poor today because of inheritance, and I said no, not really. And then I was like, oh, do you think that? And you were like, no. So I don't even know why we're talking about that.
okay, so you're saying it has nothing to do.
I
Black
would say
people.
it maybe has like a 1% chance thing to do. I think most of it is because of like systemic
Okay, then that
policies.
that kind of gets rid of your whole. I mean, that kind of gets rid of your whole argument, because if you're saying that the people back in the past, let's say
Sure.
Todd's grandma or Todd's grandpa had $1 million, you're saying that just because a black person's grandpa had $50,000, you're saying that has no impact other than the 1%. So
Well,
that
no.
kind of
Here's what
gets
I'm
rid of.
saying. I'm saying that most people in America that are like keeping their money is because they're good with money, not necessarily like just because they have the money, right? Because why do most people who win the lottery that are poor like not like keep that money, right? Because they're not necessarily like thinking long term or smart with their money, right? And so I think being smart with your money has to do with like education and stuff. However, if we look at like the top 500 Fortune CEOs, like I think it's like 86 or 96% of those are self-made, not from inheritance. But I guess sure, yeah, inheritance has a lot to do with it, I guess. So yeah, I misspoke, but yeah, sure, inheritance has a lot to do with it.
So inheritance has a lot to do with it,
Sure,
but
yeah,
fine.
and not just inheritance from grandparents to like children or parents to children. Inheritance of what like if you inherit like a certain neighborhood, right? So let's just say I'm in a like I was born into a neighborhood that's like poorer, right? If I inherit growing up in that poor neighborhood, like that would be also like an inheritance that I would like assert affects them. Or if you inherit like growing up in near a bad public school, right? I would say all of that. So yes,
hmm
not
So,
just like wealth essentially, but like assets as
yeah,
well. Yeah.
the vast majority of millionaires didn't
Yeah.
actually inherit their money. So, if you want to talk about rich people who inherited their money, I know Donald Trump did and some billionaires, but if you talk about millionaires, they actually didn't inherit their money at a big percent. Chris Hogan did a study on
Sure.
10,000 people and found out that 74% of them believe that, or 74% of millennials believe that the millionaires inherited their money. 52% of baby boomers believe that, and 21%, but 21% of all millionaires received didn't receive, or wait,
I know what you're
21.
saying. So that would only necessarily work. That study would only work if I was asserting that what they inherited was millions. I mean, you could inherit 500 grand, right? And that'd still make probably a large impact. I mean, if you inherited 500 grand, that'd make a large impact, right? But it wouldn't be into millionaires, right? So when I'm saying inheriting, I'm not necessarily talking about wealth, right? I'm talking about your area. I'm talking about where you grow up in. I'm talking about the neighborhoods you grow up in, the schools you're near, right? I'm not necessarily talking about wealth, but I'm talking about overall neighborhood status, right? And when you're talking about millionaires, sure, millionaires that's like fine and all. However, if you inherit 800,000, that's not necessarily going into his millionaire study, right? But it's still a lot of money.
Mm.
Um, and so yeah, so the first problem with your argument would be asserting that I'm only talking about inheriting wealth. And then the second flaw in your study is even if I was simply talking about wealth, I could inherit $800,000, and it still wouldn't go into that study.
What do you think? $200,000 really made that big of percentage in percentage?
Well, I'm
Maybe
saying you
not.
could inherit 800,000 and it wouldn't go into that millionaire study.
Well, yeah, true, but I don't think it
Yeah.
changes the percent a lot. I don't know, but if you're probably thinking about that.
Well,
Anyways,
I'm just
back
saying
to
it doesn't account. I'm just saying it doesn't account for all the confounding variables. Therefore, you can't make an absolute metaphysical claim.
the education
Sure.
system. You said that people don't, or poor people don't know how to handle their money. I don't think that's a racial problem. I don't know if you
Well, I
meant
mean,
like.
if they're there because of their race, then I'd say yeah. Because if we look at things like a finance school, right, or if we look at school in general, right, especially in maybe the end of high school and college, right, in at least most classes, especially like financial classes, depending on that funding of that school or how good the school is, they're going to teach you like money management. Um, if you can afford it, they can teach you certain things. You can get like the Dollar General, right, or things like that, like services that help you manage money, things like that. So I think that also has to play a part in it. And I think when you're in a specifically poor area, you don't have access to all those things. And when you say it's a class issue, I agree. But when African Americans are disproportionately in that class, I don't think you can really blame it on individual choice, unless that individual choice were to be tainted by something. So would you say that African Americans' individual choice can be tainted by things like poor communities, things like that? Because I don't think you can argue just coincidentally African Americans make lesser good choices than white people. I don't think you can say that.
Well, I don't. Well, I can't really say that
Yeah,
because
because it's a
that's just,
speculation.
yeah. There's
Yeah, so then
no
why do you think it is?
factor to that, but the education system, I don't
Sure.
think so. You're saying that like wait, so like you're saying that if you go to a worse school that's less funded,
Yeah.
which is obviously a bad thing. I don't think
Yeah.
it's a racial problem. I just think it's because this area is poor. It might be a white poor area,
Well,
but
okay, you're kind of misconstruing my argument, right? I don't disagree with you that it's a class issue, but if they're disproportionately put in that class, right, there's a reason for that. So you can argue it's a class issue all you want. And then you mentioned, well, there's some white poor areas. Yeah, that's why we have poor white people. There's white people who can't get out of the cycle of poverty. However, when African Americans were disproportionately put in it under Jim Crow, right? And tell me this, like when I was talking about how redlined communities like 97% of them, yeah, let me get the study, yeah, 97% of them, 97% of redlined communities after redlining are still poor, right? So it's not like they're escaping this redlining, right? It's not like they're breaking that cycle, right? They're still poor today. So I think it's kind of disingenuous to argue that there's absolutely no lasting effects at all from Jim Crow and slavery when we obviously see that 97% of communities from redlining are still poor today and haven't been able to get loans, invest in their communities, things like that.
well, I have studies that show otherwise. Researchers at the Federal Bank of Boston in 1992 did a study that looked at 30 different variables to lending decisions. They found that almost all of the difference between minority and non minority denial rates were explained by those variables.
Yeah,
And
but those variables can be caused from like systemic racism, right? So let me tell you some of the variables, right? So like credit score, that's a variable, right? Income, that's a variable, right? Because they want to make sure they're getting good loan returns, right? If they see you're making $30,000 a year and then you want to apply for a $100,000 loan, sometimes they don't want to wait 3 years for that loan, so that's another variable, right? And all these variables can be caused and linked from things like, oh, they don't have good like public schools, right? How are they going to be taught like specific financial decisions, right? And then it can also be linked back, especially for like income, right, or things like that, right? It can always be linked back, right? So we just keep going further and further back, right? Because we talk about redlining, right? Well, there's confounding variables to that, which I don't disagree with, right? Like credit score, right? How good they are with money, right? Oh, but how do we determine how good somebody is with money, right? So if we're talking about okay, this is actually good, right? So you admit there was would you say let's just say for the sake of the argument, I say that redlining wasn't discriminatory. Would you say there's still lasting impacts from redlining though? Like would you say
no,
there's some? Not
there's
there's
not.
none?
I'm not. Well,
There's
okay,
absolutely
so
none, like zero lasting impacts.
there are such a small percent of lasting
Oh,
impacts.
but there is some. You admit there is some, right?
Listen.
Sure.
So technically, that would mean that there is systemic racism.
Yep.
But of course, there's going to be a small percent because obviously we know that in everywhere from the 1965 and
Sure.
before
Yeah.
that, almost everything was against blacks. Almost every bill, almost every act, almost every everything. So, yeah, there might be a small lasting impact.
Well, I think we just disagree on the size of the impact then, because I think the impact is large and you think it's small. But then I guess I'll ask this. I mean, do you concede the point that African Americans, on average, it's not just all their fault? Do you think there's some external factor affecting them? You don't have to say it's racism, but do you think there's some external factor? Because the chance of just an entire race being significantly poorer on average is really low if you're trying to argue it's just individual choice and coincidence. The cultures are
Well,
too different, right?
a very small percent of that.
All right, cool.
Like I,
So, would you say that a
there's
large percent of African Americans disproportionately have children out of wedlock or choose welfare or things like that? Would you say like single motherhood rate? Those are high, right?
yeah,
All right,
yeah.
why are they high?
Because I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
think all of it.
precisely.
I don't think every 75. I don't even think 25% of those. I don't know if this is true, but my guess is because I
Well,
haven't.
okay, sure. You can guess.
Well, I haven't actually studied about
Sure.
types of percent. But what I'm guessing is I don't think a half of that. I don't think like 30% of those women that
Sure.
are 75%, I don't think all of those women decided, hey, I'm going to have two kids or one kid or three
Yeah.
kids just because I'm going to get some money from the government. So,
That's why the number's not at 100%. So you'd be right. Not all of them are. The
well,
number's not 100% because some of them still like value family like over money, but it's still 60%.
no, I'm saying, wait,
Yep, single
well,
motherhood rate in the African American community after the Great Society Act had jumped about 55%.
it's
Oh,
75%.
75%, sure, yeah.
So that's even worse.
Yeah,
But
it is. So so if your answer is you don't know, then how can you make the absolute claim that it doesn't exist, right? Because if you don't know, you can't cross out things, right? If you don't know it, then how can you cross out? How can you cross it out if you don't know?
you know,
Oh, well, yeah, I do know, and that's kind of what we've been debating. But here's the thing: if you're claiming that you don't know, then how can you make the claim that it doesn't exist, right?
you're
That's
wrong
like
about that. Are you
that's
going to how do you know? I mean, you're not telling me that that's wrong. You're not telling me that
well, I
my
have
guess.
I've kind of been explaining the whole time how like redlined communities, things like that,
No,
right?
I'm not talking about redlining. I'm talking about a single motherhood rate right now.
Oh, okay, cool. So the Great Society Act, I think I already covered that. If you want me to explain it again, though, I can if you'd like. And like the
Yeah,
welfare state in its entirety, I can explain it again if you'd like.
yeah, but okay, that's gone, and I understand that
Well,
that's
it's gone,
still a
but
thing.
the name in the thing is gone, right? It still affects them today, though, meaning like it's still active right now.
Well, that needs to be abolished, but that's a different
Well,
story.
sure, but that's systemic racism, right? Because it
How?
disproportionately affects poor people, and we can link them being poor back to Jim Crow. Because
Well,
we
I don't
understand.
think just because we're getting rid of a welfare
Well, yeah, but it
stimulus,
disproportionately affects poor people, and they're disproportionately poor because of Jim Crow and things like that.
but that's not racist. That's
Jim
just
Crow wasn't racist.
no. I'm not talking about Jim Crow. I'm saying if we abolish the stimulus that we
Sure,
give to mothers
sure,
that are like the welfare, however much they give them,
sure.
I don't think that's racist.
Well, yeah,
I
yeah.
just
That's why I don't think it's racist too. However, that this is kind of going into my definition, right? If this part of my definition that I gave back in the last recording when we debated, my definition was if the system created a culture that then it disproportionately affects, right? So the system disproportionately created a culture, right? And that culture is disproportionately affected by things like welfare, right? Having children out of wedlock, right? So that would go into my definition of how the system created the culture.
okay. Let me go back to redlining and
Sure, we can go back to redlining.
another study was done. They
Sure.
analyzed that information in 1997 and found out that black owned banks were actually lending to white-owned businesses more than they were lending to
I can explain
black-owned.
that to why if you'd like.
Okay.
It's the philosophical concept of the availability heuristic. Essentially, what this is the things you are more accustomed to, and the things that you are more familiar with, um, you are more likely to choose. So when you were talking about how African Americans, actually no, this is actually irrelevant. This would only be when we're talking about job discrimination. But just this, when you're saying that African Americans weren't lending to African Americans and were lending to white people more, I don't disagree with that because of the confounding variables, right? Like if they thought they were going to get a return or not, right? But how did they determine if they were going to get a return or not, right? They determined that based on, if they had good spending habits, if, maybe past loans that they didn't, maybe like specific past loans they didn't make good on or declared bankruptcy in the past, right? But what caused them to have, like lower rates? And this was in like the 50s, right? So we understand Jim Crow, right? Schools were segregated. So we understand that black people didn't have as good as education, right, as white people, right, on average. And so when we realized they didn't have as good financial education as white people, then no, it's no wonder why they were denied loans more. It's because of segregation, right? They didn't have access to things like how you spend well, right? I mean, I'm going into freshman year, right? And like last year, we were already taught like good spending habits. How you want to open like an ETF. I already opened mine under like a minor account. Like they teach you that stuff at least in my school, right? Um, and so when we look at redlining, right? Redlining was in a time of segregation, right? Like in the 50s, right? Or the 40s, right? And so we look at, oh, well, what did African Americans not have access to in the 40s and 50s as well as white people did? Oh, well, not as well as education, school area, things like that, right? And so African Americans couldn't learn as well as the white people. Therefore, they didn't have as good as spending habits. Therefore, they didn't have as good as, all these things, right? And so banks denied loans to them, not necessarily on the basis of race, but on the basis of, spending habits, things like that. And those spending habits themselves were created by segregation.
Okay, and by the 80s,
Sure.
frankly, the banks were not lending at disproportional rates. So by then, they were basically 50-50. Because they weren't lending at disproportional rates anymore, maybe in some places.
Oh, no, no. It was still 27% for African Americans. Which
Wait,
was which
everywhere?
was well, I mean on average, so I mean I guess you could say everywhere, but on average it was a 27% denial rate, which was very large. Like 27% of all like things like for African Americans on average, which was way higher than white people, which was 19% to 23%. So that means it's about like 8% to 5% difference, which is which doesn't like 8% to 5% doesn't seem like a large difference, but if we're doing it from like a basis of race, that's a large difference. Like 5 to 8%, that could mean the difference between a lot of things. And that was like in the 80s, right? We're not even talking about during redlining when for African Americans it was closer to 50%, and for white people it was closer to 15%.
Can you show me like where you got that information?
Oh yeah, sure. It's from the FBI, like FBI.gov. Sure. Let me get the doc up. Um, let's see. Hmm. All right, cool. Just have to do Control F. I actually got this from the classical liberal hype houses. You know them?
Yeah,
Yeah,
on
I actually got this from their doc. It was very helpful, even though they're like against systemic racism. It's still like here. Let's go redlining space. All right, perfect. So even though it's in the debunking of redlining, it's still going through like the difference, right? So in a 2013 prudential research, 40% of blacks considered themselves spenders and 51% considered them savers. And only 9% of them actually invested, and this is according to prudential research in the 2013 survey, right? So this shows how that culture of this Jim Crow taught them like to not like save well and things like that. Didn't give them good opportunities, right? And 61.3% of blacks under 18 live with a single mother. So my rate was kind of closer. It was I think I said 60%. You said 75.
okay, okay.
So it's actually 61.3%. And this was also about the same survey. So you could argue different sample sizes, but I mean that's fine. So kids from single parent families and neighborhoods with high percentages of fathers do better than kids from two-parent families in neighborhoods with lower percentages of fathers, right? So this is talking about how single motherhood rate can affect certain things.
Yeah,
Um,
obviously.
yeah, sure. And so then, as far back as 1980, college-educated black married couples earned slightly more than ones who weren't married. And then also things like African Americans not being able to graduate high school. A lot of since the single motherhood rate, they had to work jobs that like they had to almost like miss school because they had to work like with single motherhoods with their single motherhoods what am I saying they had to work with their single mothers, right, because they weren't making enough money off of simply welfare alone. However, they couldn't get a job because it was significantly less. um and then talking about certain thing. Oh yeah, so this is what I was talking about. So according to the American College of Cardiology in 2018, yeah, so it was 55% of black men were denied loans in the 1940s on average, and then it got lower every single rate, which I'm not disagreeing with you that it got lower every single decade, like they started to accept African Americans. However, what I'm claiming is like the damage has already been done, and when you have communities that have already been ruined, it's like you can't really argue there's been no lasting effects because if African Americans started to be poor during like Jim Crow, and then they started to get better, but then they got way worse from like the Great Society Act. You can't really argue that systemic racism hasn't had an impact on today's society.
Okay, so I have a question for
Sure,
you.
sure.
So do you think that redlining in general only helped white people, or do you think
No,
it's
it helped Asians and whites, but for
okay?
Hispanics and blacks, it ruined them. But since
Yeah.
blacks had a single motherhood rate of way higher, it affected them way more than Hispanics. Because even though Hispanics and African Americans have like close to the same poverty levels, African Americans have way more single motherhood households.
So
So
one
yeah,
thing, a question I have for you
sure,
is one thing a lot of Republicans are talking about right now
sure,
is the murder rate and how many black people
sure.
are being killed. So my question to you is, how is it that Hispanics almost have
Mm-hmm.
the same poverty
Yeah.
rate and they live almost in the same
Yep.
circumstances as blacks, but the percentage of people that are see, I don't know what I'm saying.
You mean
So
why do they commit more crime even though being in the
yeah,
same
why did
economic
no,
status?
not just the number, the percentage.
Sure,
So
percentage.
yeah, so how is that? So if you're
Single
making
motherhood rate. Still
if
predictor. It's a large predictor in crime and poverty.
so you're saying that the single motherhood
Yeah, if
rate
you'd like
has
some numbers, single motherhood families, 10 times the children of single motherhood of families 5 times more likely to go to jail at least once, 2 times more likely to be there twice, almost 13% more likely to commit a crime, and also 5 times more likely to be poor, in like lower class. Those are the numbers. So yeah, single motherhood rate. That's the explanation for your question.
okay. Well, I mean, is that like your whole excuse? I mean, that's not an excuse, but is that like your whole
My
reason or
answer.
yeah?
The question was, yeah. I mean, what would your answer be? Why do you think they do that?
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah. See, when you keep saying like I don't know, then you say it doesn't exist. You can't make an absolute metaphysical claim that it doesn't exist, and then say you don't know if you don't know why it exists. You can't say you know it doesn't exist and then not know why the actual thing exists because that'd be committing that actually be committing I'm not sure what logical fallacy it is. Oh yeah, it's a metaphysical logical fallacy because you're making a metaphysical claim that it doesn't exist, but then you don't know why it exists. So if you wanted to claim systemic racism didn't exist, you'd have to show me what the actual reason is. You can't just say I don't know the reason and then tell me it doesn't exist. You'd have to show me the reason for why blacks have all of these bad things, like worse public schools in black communities, things like that. So you'd have to find why they have that, and the actual reasoning, because you can't say it was based off class, because they were put in that class during segregation. So that'd be conceding to my point. But if you wanted to not be committing a logical fallacy, therefore essentially like disadvantaging you by a lot in like debates and stuff, you'd have to find out why African Americans are disproportionately poorer, and then you'd have to go back and back and back. But when you go back, you're just proving systemic racism exists, right? So you can't say it doesn't. You can't say that systemic racism doesn't exist and then tell me why the original reason doesn't exist. If you had to claim or wanted to claim systemic racism didn't exist, you'd have to tell me the actual reason for why like African Americans are poor and stuff. You can't just say
Okay,
it
so
doesn't
speaking
exist.
about the education system and like
Sure.
blacks,
Yeah.
the education system is
Sure.
was worse for blacks.
Yeah.
So you're saying that people that have more money know how to handle their money more because of the
Not
education.
necessarily.
Well, okay.
I'm just saying people who tend to be good at spending, like with better spending habits, tend to keep their money longer than people who don't know how to like good spending habits. And I'm saying those spending habits can come from things like better schooling.
Well, I think you have to blame the education system, not because of
Well, I
systemic
can tell
racism.
you. I can tell you why. Like, I'll explain this to you. All right. So, essentially, how are public schools funded? Right. Well, they're funded through property taxes, right? And well, why can't they just go to another school, right? The government has put it in place so you can only go to schools in your communities or your districts, right? So that'd be the system coming in place and saying, nope, you can only go to the school in your district for public schools.
That
Uh,
that's not true. You can open
have you
enroll.
heard of school choice? The
You
School
can
Choice
open
Act.
you can open enroll in certain schools. I'm not saying
Well,
100.
what? No, do you
Yeah.
know why? Okay, search up school choice for me. In fact,
Okay.
is school choice allowed? Like, is school choice, um, right now? Like, for example, because, yeah. So, school choice now. So that that's PragerU. So that's PragerU's thing to be a thing. But yeah, so essentially, like especially like Democrats, right? I'm not necessarily a Democrat, right? But they're really against school choice, right? And so you could say, maybe not in their exact district, right? But like a lot of black communities are near more black communities, and so unless they want to be driving like necessarily like an hour away, from their home, which takes a while, then that'd be hard. And also, let's take into account that a lot of African American communities, especially in lower classes, don't have the best transportation. And since public schools are funded by property taxes, the school won't be able to like provide buses and things like that.
So basically, I have my own experience with that. So
That's anecdotal, but you can go for it.
okay. So I used to live in a big town. Now I live in a
Sure,
smaller town. And
sure,
the bigger town obviously had more poor people,
sure,
but you could open enroll in that school.
sure,
So you can open enroll
sure,
that in a school district that's poorer than the district I'm in now, where you can't open enroll because
sure,
you just can't open enroll in the district because the town is so small and it's a suburban town compared to a town that has more poor people, not necessarily more black people, but more poor people just in general. So that's kind of not true because like I know so many other schools where you can open enroll in bigger towns, and obviously in bigger towns and cities we all know that there's going to be a more percent of people.
Well, I have a question for you. How do you get to those cities? Like, how would you get to them if you're like a small town? How would you get to them? I assume drive, right?
Yeah, but
Maybe
okay, but
bike.
this sounds okay, but literally, okay, what I'm saying is if you're the small town is right next to
Okay, this is like the anecdotal times 10. I could just give you an example of a small town not close to a large town, and then your argument would fall apart entirely. Your premise is based on the sole fact that you assume, first of all, you assume low income communities have good transportation. Second of all, you're assuming that the small communities are next to large communities, and that premise is totally false. Because I could
I'm
just give
not
you an
no,
example.
I'm not assuming that in
So then,
general. I'm just
why are you making the point
I
then?
just actually
Yeah.
every single small town that is near every small town that I know of in Ohio is around 15 minutes away
Okay,
from
well then I could give you like I live in the state of Washington, right? I live like basically in Seattle, right? However, there's like in the other side of the state, there's Spokane, right? And especially in like eastern Washington, there's a lot of like poor towns, right? Especially with like Native American reservations and also like African Americans, right? And if they were to drive for Seattle, that'd be a 3 hour drive. So you can give me your
Well,
like you can give
I didn't say to just go to one certain school. I'm saying in I mean, we all know Ohio isn't like
yeah.
a big state that has, it's a rural state that has a lot of
Mm-hmm.
farms and stuff like
Sure.
that. And I'm saying that even in a rural state like Ohio, maybe not in Kansas, but in most states, if you're going to say
Mm-hmm.
Ohio is and Kansas doesn't have the same black percentage as bigger states. So that kind of gets rid of that whole argument too. So if you have a rural state that has cities and towns right next to each other, in almost every town, I mean, it's it's just true that if you're a smaller town, you probably have a better school district because of a lot of smaller towns handle money better because they don't have um, as much of a population. And obviously, if you're in a smaller town, there's going to be a less, most of the time, there's going to be a less poverty rate because if you live in a town that has a population of 50,000, there's going to be more people in poverty
Wait,
than there.
I think I'm getting confused with where your point's going. You kind of we kind of went from how sometimes African Americans don't have the best transportation, and then their small town it's bad, and then we went from you talking about some Kansas town and how they're worse spending with money or something. I don't really see the correlation.
No, what I'm trying to say is towns where you can open and roll.
Sure.
This is all getting to a point. Towns where you can, or cities where you can open and roll are bigger, and that also correlates with smaller towns where you can't open and roll.
Okay, cool. So then would you? So then then you'd have to say that a form of systemic racism exists for small black towns, but not inner city African Americans, because that's your premise.
No,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah, that's what you were arguing. You were arguing that
no.
if you were saying that small towns usually don't have open enrollment, and I'm saying okay, so then what about the African Americans who can't open enroll?
The African Americans who can't open and
Yeah, in
roll
small towns, because you just
in
said small
small
towns.
towns,
Yeah, in
in
small
small
towns.
towns, well, you can go to a bigger town. I mean, or a bigger
Okay, yeah,
city.
but they cost money to move to a bigger city, right? And you're assuming that
You
they
have
have
to
that.
move to a bigger city, and it's usually smaller towns. Almost every small town is in the premise of 15 to 20 minutes away from a bigger town.
Wait, what do you mean by in the premise? What do you mean by in the premise of? What do you mean by that?
Like, okay, so
Because when
let's
you
say
say
I
premise,
went.
premise is like a set of like because you when you're saying they can just go to a school in the big city, first of all you're asserting that first of all they can afford to move there, right? Second of all
No,
you're
I'm not
affording
saying
that.
they can move there. I'm not saying they
Well,
can move there. I
so
never
then what
said.
if it's 3 hours away? What if it's 3 hours away? Would they just drive
You're
there?
not understanding what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying that a small town, let's say a small
Mm-hmm.
town with a population of 10 minutes
Sure.
or 10,000 people, usually you can
Mm-hmm.
drive to a bigger town with, let's say, a population of 40,000 to 50,000 people in around 15 minutes. There's always going to be bordering
Well,
towns that.
not necessarily. Let me give you an example. So, like Idaho, right? So there's a town called Sun Valley, right? So the next big town, like to Sun Valley. So in Sun Valley, there's about like in like a large mile radius, like a 3 hour radius. There's maybe about 2 to 3 to 4 schools, right? It's in Idaho, right? The next big town is 3 hours away, and it's in Boise, Idaho. So you can give me
Well,
all
okay,
this anecdotal evidence.
I already stated that states like Kansas and
Well,
small
why?
states that
Okay,
are more rural. Okay, Ohio is like in the middle
sure.
of rural and big. So I'm saying that, and if you look at the number of blacks that live in rural states, they're lower than the amount of blacks that live in bigger
Really?
states.
Are you sure?
So
I think it has more to do with inner cities. I mean, there's a lot of African Americans in Chicago, a lot of African
exactly,
Americans.
if
Yeah,
you're
but
gonna have.
Chicago, if you say like Chicago's rural, right? I mean, that's kind of weird. I mean, you can argue the states themselves are, but the majority of them are in big concentrated cities, right? So
But
I mean,
I never said that Illinois was rural, and Illinois isn't. necessarily rural. It's like in the middle, and
I mean,
that's
it's
where
like a big farming state, but I mean,
that's so is Ohio. But
yeah.
you're just obviously not understanding what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't really
Well,
get it because you're arguing certain arbitrary lines, which I can counter by just giving you a situation of where those lines wouldn't exist. So let's
okay,
look at some of your
okay,
lines.
if that's true, I can give you a situation
All right, sure. Then
of
give me a situation.
no, I can give you a
All
situation,
right, you can do
a
that.
town or where a little neighborhood
Sure.
of in some type of town
Yeah.
that isn't being highly affected by systematic racism. And I'm not going to go and find some random town in.
Well, that would be used to prove that systematic racism isn't as prevalent there, but not to say it doesn't exist in America, right? I'm trying to claim that on average it exists in America. And so to claim that on average it wouldn't exist, you'd have to give me an overwhelming amount of towns, right? Or on average. Because on average, if they're affected more, then giving me a town doesn't make anything. It doesn't, I don't, I could honestly care less about a little town that's different, right? If it's an anomaly, I could honestly care less because we don't really care about the anomaly when we're looking at averages. Sure, it may affect the average a little, but we're looking at the average here.
Okay, let me go back to what I
Sure,
was talking about because I don't know
sure.
why you can't wrap your mind.
Yeah, I
Uh,
just don't really understand it because okay, here, try and summarize it in like a couple sentences just so
I
like
cannot summarize it in a couple
okay,
sentences.
so let me
No,
okay,
I can't stop. I can't
wait,
summarize it.
okay, wait, can I just say some things and like you tell me if you agree with this or not? Like all right, so okay, so you were talking about all right, so would you agree with this statement or disagree? With and this is in regards to what you said. I just want to make sure I got what you said clearly. Um, school choice in a small town, if it's limited, you can usually, or always, or usually, go to a larger town and find a school that you can choose there. Is that what you were talking about? Do you agree
Yes,
with that?
because
All right, perfect. So I didn't. It's not like I misunderstood it. And maybe you're misunderstanding my response because I understood what you meant. But the problem with that, if you're trying to disprove systematic racism with that, you can't
I'm not
disprove
trying to disprove it overall. I'm just trying to give
Okay,
a
well,
small.
we're disproving it overall, not in situations. So
Well, I'm just no. So why were we talking about redlining?
we were talking about redlining because as a whole, it affected them, right?
I'm
And when
giving a
you're
circumstance where, as a whole, a black person who doesn't have school choice because let's say they live in
mm-hmm,
a small town or maybe a big town. If you live in a big town, you're obviously going to have more schools
sure.
99% of the time.
Oh,
So
then
you
I
have
see our confusion because I'm saying I was using redlining like to prove systemic racism does exist. You don't have to prove necessarily that it doesn't exist, right? Because that's a burden of proof. You just have to disprove what I'm saying, right? And so when we're talking about circumstances, right? I'm talking about circumstances that affected communities on average as a whole. And if you're trying to say that school choice doesn't affect African Americans on a whole, when we're looking at school choice and we're looking at the amount of communities that have or have not school choice, if you actually look at the maps, a lot of it has to do with like predominantly black areas, right? And so you can argue, oh well, let's just argue that 90% of America has school choice, right? And we look at the 10%. If the 10% is disproportionately affecting African American communities, because like think of it like this, right? If I'm in a white community and if I want to choose like a rich school, but I'm like, oh, I don't want to go to this rich school. I want to go to this other rich school, right? That's not necessarily too relevant. But if I'm like an African American, right, and I'm like, oh, I want to go from this poor school in my neighborhood to a rich school in another neighborhood, right? That's way less common, right? And if the idea that African Americans could just go to better schools, right, should go to the best school, like go to a nicer school, they would do that, right? But the truth is they're not. So unless you're trying to argue they're either dumb or misinformed, then I'm not really sure what you'd be arguing, right? Because if they could, they would, right? Like if let's just say I'm like somebody poor, right, and I could go to a way better public school, I would definitely do that. Like why wouldn't you go to a better public school?
no. Okay, what I'm saying. Okay, first of all, you said we're not talking about any topic and we're like not talking about systematic racism, but
I didn't
you
say we're
literally
not talking about systematic racism. I'm saying
no,
we're not
you're
talking about instances of towns.
saying
We're talking about the policies as a whole, not like small towns as instances. Like you can give me small towns, but I'm saying we're talking about like policies, right? Systems.
yeah,
A
we're
town
talking
isn't.
about we're talking about policies.
Yeah, sure.
By talking about school choice, we're talking about school choice right now, and
Yeah.
I'm giving you this kind of unusual example. I've never heard anyone talk about this, but this is kind of true because let's say you live in a small town with a population
Well,
of
this is like
10.
anecdotal. Like when you're giving me anecdotes about like
I'm not saying no, this is a real situation.
All
This
right, cool.
isn't This happens in every state.
Well, I gave you a state of Idaho where that doesn't happen, but continue.
Almost every county.
All right, so
Like
let's
I
just say
said,
it happens
no,
in.
it happens in every state, but it happens in almost every county. There's always situations in every state where
Sure.
you can go to a different school in maybe a bigger city, or
Sure.
maybe sometimes in a smaller city. So what I'm trying to say is usually the transportation time that it takes to get to a small town to a big town.
Sure.
If you can open enroll in that big town, which almost always you can open enroll in a big school, especially when there's more than one, because
Sure.
they have room for it. Maybe not in a smaller school, but maybe sometimes you can.
All right, cool. So then,
So
let's talk about. I guess then we can talk about. Since this is kind of like really getting you like just like school choice, right? Let's talk about let's just talk about an African American community in Idaho, right? Let's just talk about the small town of Sun Valley, right? The biggest town is 3 hours away from them, right? So unless you're trying to say that that community would drive 3 hours, explain how like
no,
a
I'm
school
saying
choice would affect them.
once again, listen clearly. I don't know if
Yeah, I am. You said tell me if I'm wrong. You said that in most cases you can, if you're in a small town, you can open enroll in a big town, right? And usually big towns are close by, right? That's what you said. Hello? Oh, is he gone? Did my Wi-Fi
counties.
cut out? No, my Wi-Fi's good.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, I think you cut out for a while. Okay, I'll just go back to what I said. So you said this correct? That if you're in a small town, there's usually a big town nearby. Therefore, school choice isn't necessarily a relevant argument
Yeah.
just because.
So you
Right.
gave me Idaho. You gave me this
Sure.
random. I don't even know if that's a real town, but anyways.
Okay. I'll link it to you in the chat. Here. No,
Okay.
I'll just link it to you. It's fine. Sun Valley, Idaho. Here, I'll link it to you. Here. Here's the site. There you go. There's Sun Valley.
Okay.
Sun Valley, Idaho. You can. It's called Ketchum, Sun Valley. It's a city in Idaho.
Okay, but anyways,
And then wait, hold on. Let me just search up Sun Valley, Idaho to Boise drive time because we assume they're mostly gonna be driving. Yeah, 2 hours and 41 minutes.
what is the biggest? What is the biggest city next to them? What is
Boise.
another?
Boise.
Okay. And I don't know if I have to say this slowly because I already told you this.
Sure.
I said in the United States as a whole,
Mhm.
open enrollment is very common,
Sure.
but in some counties it's not. We all know
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
So I already said that. Some counties. So you're giving me this random ass example of some little town in Idaho being 2 hours away.
I can give you
From
another example if you want.
I don't want you to. I can give you examples of.
All right, yeah. So I think if we're just gonna compare this example to example, it doesn't really matter because if I'm proving systemic racism, I only have to prove one example because then it exists, right? You have to prove that one example wrong, right? So if I prove to you, like, if I'm trying to say something exists, right, and I give you one example of where it
Okay, how
exists,
many black people are in Sun Valley, Idaho?
I can look if you'd like. I mean, if there's even one, then that's where an instance of where school choice would affect them. So, I mean, I would assume there's at least
that
one.
would actually mean that school choice affects everyone. It's not
What? No.
against. It's not against blacks in general.
Yeah, I
course
never
it's
said that.
blacks, but that's not systemic racism. If there's one, okay, let's say there's 3 black people in Sun Valley,
There's
Idaho.
not 3. Come on. Are you saying there's 3?
No, I'm just giving an example.
All right.
Just because they don't have school choice, white people don't have school choice too. Because
Yep.
if there's white
Agreed.
people in that town, that means both of them are systematically not racist, but systematically affected.
Well, no, I think you're kind of going against my definition because if it affects them because of things in the past that happened because of their race, like think about it like this, right? So let's just say an African American wanted to go to engineering school in the 40s, right? And
Actually, what would get rid of your
yeah,
whole point
sure.
is if you looked at how good of a school Sun Valley, Idaho is.
I've seen their school, right? And so their school is actually not that nice. I mean, it's in a community that isn't necessarily like the richest. It's actually a predominantly black community. And so it's not the
Can you
richest,
give me
right?
averages? I know there's averages in different school
Yeah,
districts. There's
averages on average.
um, sometimes they'll like grade their performance, not like
Sure,
the
but
actual.
here the problem with your thing is when you're trying to say like don't look at the race, it like affects all of them. The problem with that is white people weren't put in that Sun Valley, Idaho neighborhood because of their race, right? They didn't face Jim Crow unless you could give me an instance of where white people were affected by Jim Crow, right?
I'm
And
not
so
talking about Jim
no,
Crow. I'm
no, no,
talking
no, but
about
it's relevant to my point because the history affects now, right? If you're trying to argue that like there's absolutely no or very little lasting effects, then we'd have to see some pattern changes, right? And so we look at African American single motherhood rate, right? They've been essentially the same since the 60s. That's a lasting effect, right? And then we look at their income, right? Their income has been it's actually been a little all over the place. It went down for a couple years and then it went up. It's kind of going up and down, right? And it's been going up and down at pretty much the same rate since the 1950s, right? That's a lasting effect. You can't argue there is no lasting effect, right? Because if I can give you patterns, then you can't deny there's a lasting effect. You can argue if that lasting effect was because of systematic racism, like you could argue was Jim Crow racist or not, was slavery racist or not, right? You can argue that, but if I give you if I give you a rate and then I tell you that rate's been the same since like the 60s or 50s, then that by definition would be under my definition systematic racism that we agreed to in the beginning because it's a lasting effect.
So now you're trying to move back to redlining,
What
and
how was I moving back to redlining?
well, no, not in that whole statement, but you were talking about I prove you wrong in redlining.
Well, no, what I'm trying to say is basically just going back to my definition. If there's a rate that has been the same since a racist policy, that means it's a lasting effect by
Do you
definition.
think that blacks are being discriminated because of a wealth gap between whites and blacks? Do you think that's
Yeah, I
because I
think
know?
it's heavily a class issue, and I think the reason they're in that class is where the whole discussion lies.
See, I don't think it's a wealth gap. I think it's a. Let me find this. Wait a second.
Oh no! Don't tell me you probably found this on like a Candace Owens Instagram
No,
talking point.
I was doing research and I have a Google Doc. Oh, okay, here we go. The
Sure.
fact it's actually a wage gap issue because if you look back in the 1960s, blacks could get paid more or the same for the same job
Sure.
they could do today because
Oh, I
that's
have a
not because
question.
of
Was that because of was that because of systems or institutions that paid them more?
that's just because
They
of
just got paid more just because?
no, that's because of the minimum wage not rising like it should be. And
All
I'm
right,
not saying
and who caused the minimum wage to stay there? I would assume that either an institution or the system, correct?
every leader who hasn't changed it.
All right, perfect. Right, so that's a system in place. Perfect.
That's not systematic racism. It's blacks.
Well,
Okay,
by my definition, it would be. We can argue a different definition if you want, but the definition you agreed to, would be.
but the fact that you used to be able to get into a decent college and paid off working a minimum wage job while in college, to now being in debt if you go to an expensive college in the United States. If you wanted to go to a low college back in the
Sure.
1960s, even if you were black, you could work at a minimum wage job. So that kind of gets rid of your whole thing with, okay, let's pay. The parents are going to pay for.
How? Because when you're talking about those acts, right?
Because if you want to go, listen, if you want to go to college, if you wanted to go to college in a, let's say, 50,000 or something like that,
A
you could work
50,000 what? Like tuition?
yeah, I'm saying
Sure.
like okay, college used to be very cheap compared to now,
Sure. Yeah,
and
yeah.
the
Yeah. So where
wage
like everything was cheaper.
it's not a historical gap between classes. I just think it's a historical gap between the minimum wage, which is
All right, but yeah,
Republican.
but when we're looking at the
It's
minimum
not
wage,
systematic racism.
well, the
What?
minimum wage laws were actually like if you could give me the name of the person who enacted those here minimum wage first minimum um wage law in America. Let's look all right, so it was in 1912. Let's look at president of 1912. All right, okay, so it was William Taft, but the person who enacted it was Woodrow Wilson. All right, so let's look at this. Was Woodrow Wilson racist? Princeton will remove Woodrow Wilson's name from school due to racist. Yeah, he was a racist, right? Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, USA Today. Maybe you don't want to use Vox, The Atlantic. In fact, most universities like NPR, Washington Post, NBC, USA Today. In fact, Princeton's actually removing Woodrow Wilson's name from school because of his racist history, right? So yeah, it was a racist that implemented it. So,
So, so
well, are you saying if a racist implements a law, what? So if a Nazi implements a
okay,
law,
just
wait, hold on, let me tell you this. If a Nazi implements a law that disproportionately affects Jewish people, are we just gonna say, he probably wasn't trying to target them? It could have been by coincidence. No, if a racist implements a law that was that disproportionately affects black people just coincidentally,
what? What does that have to do
what does
with the
him
minimum
being racist have to do with
wage?
systematic racism? I'm confused.
No. What does a racist? What does that have to do with the minimum wage not rising
Be
in
what
over 50 years? What does that have to do with anything that I'm trying?
because when he implemented the first minimum wage laws, that kind of set in course for like it's kind of like think about it like this. So
It
we just
didn't.
talk
Okay,
about
but
progression and
the
yeah.
minimum wage didn't affect anyone. He wasn't like,
Oh, it didn't.
okay, black minimum wage is $5, but white minimum
Well,
wage is
yeah, but
7.
okay. I think I see our confusion, right? If you don't think it affects black people for being black, you don't think it's systematically racist. However, my view is if black
Okay,
people wait, hold
so
on, let me finish. So your view is if it doesn't affect them just for being black, then it can't be systematic racism. However, my view is that if black people were put in a specific class, right, and they've been in that class and stayed in that class, and they were originally put in that class because of racism, right, and then that class is disproportionately affected, then that would be systematic racism. So I think we just fundamentally disagree on definition because you think it has to disproportionately affect. It'd be like this. So let's just say this. So let's say Jewish people, right? Actually no. Let me just make up a random scenario. So let's just say there was a race of people, right, and they had super long hair. Not all of them, but most of them had super long hair. And then there was another race, right, where most of them had really short hair. Not all of them, but most of them had short hair, right? And then let's just say me as a president said, let's just say I really hated people with short hair, and I said, okay, I really don't like people with short hair, right? I'm gonna implement either welfare or minimum wage laws to disproportionately affect those people, right? In fact, I'm gonna create segregation against them, right? Okay, so now we've established that because of segregation, people with short hair, not all of them, right? The community with predominantly short hair is poor, right? Not all of them, because some of them have long hair, right? But then the people predominantly with long hair, they're pretty much financially fine, right? All right, so now that we've established that, right? And so let's just say there's a new president, right? He says that he really hates people with short hair, right? He implements some laws. Now he didn't openly say that these laws were meant for people with short hair. He said they were meant for poor people, right? But when we look at the society, if we look at why the people in short hair were in poverty, it's because of segregation. And then we look at why the long hair people aren't. It's because they were fine against the government, right? And so okay, so we take into account that the short haired people live in segregation, right? And then we take into account that the long haired people don't. But let's just say segregation. Let's actually no, minimum wage laws was in 1912. So let's just talk about like that. So under segregation, right?
Yep.
The people in short-haired communities, they're offered specific bonuses. Let's just say welfare, right? Well, they're really poor, right? So they're going to choose that. They also have higher rates of crime, things like that, right? So it's harder for them to get loans, things like that, right? Because segregative policies in the past have made it so this is I don't really want to get back to redlining a lot, But let's just bring up redlining for the sake of the argument. So let's just say, they have high rates of crime because they're poor, under segregation, and let's just say the next year, right? People with short hair, they finally don't have to live under segregation. There was a civil rights movement, so they're all fine now, right? Well, wrong, because we understand that during segregation they didn't have the same opportunities, and even though they're equal under the law, there's still effects from when the segregation happened, right? Because let's just say you admit that segregation people made people poor, right?
Well,
I mean, you kind of have to say yes. I mean, if you're ripped from your family at the age of 5, right, and then let's just say under Jim Crow you don't have access to the same like goods and services as white people, you can't really argue that
I'm not answering that question because I still don't get how Woodrow Wilson implementing minimum wage.
I'm trying to explain that, but I'm just gonna ask you: do you think segregation made people a little more poor?
I'm not answering that question because you're going way off topic. You're going way
off
topic.
Okay, no. This is important to my point, which I'm gonna get on topic. Like sometimes you have to go on topic for your point to eventually go back to the the topic. So just to answer this one question.
I don't know how someone.
So you're not answering the question because why are you not?
You're doing the same thing that I did earlier.
Well, no. I'm going off topic for the reason of it being a part of the. I can tell you why it's going to be a part of the topic because. Let's just say this. So I'm not sure if you figured this out, but I'm saying that the short-haired people are essentially like African Americans and long-haired like white people, right? So the short-haired people, just like African Americans, went under segregation, right? And so the long-haired people, which would be white people, didn't go under segregation in America, right? And so once we've established this, right? And so once we understand that the short-haired people in segregation made them poor, and then the long-haired people had extra opportunities to reinvest in communities, things like that. And so they're good, right? I mean, they're not necessarily great, but they're way better than the short-haired people. Then let's just say a new president, right, which would be Woodrow Wilson, says, okay, so for working places, I'm implementing a $15 minimum wage. However, this is only going to mostly apply for poorer class or lower class jobs, right? Like working at McDonald's, because any other high class job would pay more than $15 an hour, right?
So after you implement a minimum wage, that gets rid of I'm low class because I work at McDonald's and make $7 an hour. So let's just say he added a minimum wage.
Sure.
Let's say the minimum wage is $15 under Woodrow Wilson, and let's say before that same McDonald's worker was making $6 an hour, $7 an hour.
Sure.
If he implements that minimum wage, that actually rises them out.
Wait, are you saying that the minimum? Okay, you just went against entirely libertarian ideology. So here's the thing with minimum wage. I'm actually against raising it, and here's why. So for minimum wage, right? When you artificially raise the minimum wage, like you're essentially objectifying. I can't even talk. You're essentially objectifying the amount of labor, like essentially saying it's objective, right? So regardless of the service, you are getting paid $15 an hour or less, right? Or more, right? No, here's the thing. Let me finish. All right, so with minimum wage laws, you're not actually getting paid more. It just devalues your work, right? You're not actually getting paid more money in reality, right? The value, because the minimum wage in terms of value has been the same since 1911, right? It's been the same.
Yes.
However, the quantability isn't the same as the qualability, right? With the quality being the same regardless of that minimum wage law, right? Therefore, it's not helping them.
You have went so off topic.
No, I didn't, because you brought up minimum wage laws, and I was explaining why the minimum wage didn't help them.
Now what I'm talking about, I was talking about college, actually.
You brought up minimum. Did you not bring up minimum wage?
You have to make this whole folktale
Wait, you
about
didn't.
some
leader. Wait, you didn't bring up minimum wage? I'm gonna go
No,
look
I'm
back at
talking
the
about,
recording.
okay, I did bring up minimum wage because that ties into college. You making up some folktale about some.
Well, it's a hypothetical saying that if somebody's been discriminated against, just saying that discrimination is illegal doesn't change that discrimination affected them. And just because, like, if I just make, like, let's just say redlining exists today, right? And it's been affecting them for like 100 years, right? And then I say, oh, okay, redlining is illegal. That doesn't mean that the effects from redlining are still there, and you're trying to argue they aren't there.
Making up. Okay.
Making it up? No, it's a real life situation. Tell me in my story. I mean, unless you're trying to say blacks didn't face discrimination.
Okay, tell me yours was like a folk tale and
okay, then I'll use it in real life. Okay, so African Americans have been segregated against, right? We understand this, like in the past, right? And so then we look at redlining. Okay, so when was redlining out? But let me get the exact date. All right, so when was redlining outlawed? Okay, so redlining was outlawed in 1968, right? So in 1969, right, or in 1968 when it was outlawed, right? So would you say? So let me just look like this. So when did redlining start? All right, so redlining started in 1934, which means there was about 34 years of redlining. Would you say over those 34 years, redlining? So would you say that over those 34 years, redlining, it had an effect? Would you say it had an
Yes,
effect?
it obviously
All right,
had an
perfect,
effect.
perfect. So do you think when it was outlawed in 1968, do you think when it was outlawed, all those effects went away?
No, not yet, because they hadn't
Yep,
established the acts
precisely.
that they
Yep,
that they made in
perfect.
the
So we agree.
years
I mean,
following.
you and I agree. We understand that even if you
Yeah,
make it
there was
illegal, there's an
systematic
effect.
racism up until 1974, until they actually started making acts that got rid of most of the effects of redlining.
Oh, it did. So then, why were
And
they still poor? Why were those communities? Why are 97% of the communities that were redlined still poor today? If those effects work so well, if those acts that you claim to have helped the black community, why are those communities still poor? Right? If those acts that you claim to help them, why are those communities still poor if they worked so well?
listen,
I'm
I was
listening.
I was I was talking about college, and somehow you brought it back
Wait, so you're
to
not going to respond to my point?
okay, maybe you won. Okay, maybe you
Yep.
won
Mm-hmm.
on that category.
Okay.
But we're
Cool.
talking about something else right now.
All
We're
right. So you
talking about
admit. Okay. So you admit that I won on the other thing, but then we're going to talk about this thing.
we're talking about something else. Just because someone wins a debate on foreign policy in a Democratic primary debate doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean everyone says pack your bags, the debate is over.
Well, no, but
Everyone
here's
leaves.
the problem with that, right? For me, proving systematic racism, I only have to prove one system for there to be systematic racism. When you're winning a debate, the only part of the debate, if you're trying to prove that Republicans have a worse foreign policy, right? Or you, okay, so it'd basically be like this.
Just because no,
No, hold on.
just because
What?
excuse me, just
Sure.
because a Republican wins a debate about foreign policy doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean that's true. We're talking
Okay.
about a whole different subject right now, and you won redlining. We're on to a different subject.
Okay, wait, hold on. Here's my
I'm
thing.
winning on this subject.
Wait,
You
no.
were
Here's the problem with that, though. Let's just say you are winning on the subject. If I want to prove systemic racism, I only have to prove one system, which I did, which means I win the whole debate. Because for systematic racism, I only have to prove one system, and then it exists. So
so
then I automatically win.
if I want to prove that, let's say we should go invade
Mm-hmm.
Iraq or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
just because I give one reason why, because you're
What?
giving one reason
No.
why.
What? No. You're kind of doing my thing. All right. So let's just say this, right? So let's just say I make the claim, and I say Republicans have never invaded a country, right? I only have to give one example of where Republicans have invaded a country, and then I'm proven right, right? I don't have to go through each country that Republicans have invaded. I only have to go through one to prove that Republicans have
No,
invaded a country.
you haven't proven.
Why? Well, you said I won
I
redlining.
just haven't had as many facts as you.
Wait, what? You're saying I didn't win the debate? You just didn't have as many facts as me. That makes no sense because that
No,
means you
you
lost the
did
debate.
win that topic of the debate.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Thank
you're
you.
saying no. What you're saying is that something is correct or something is right just because you win one topic of that. We're on
What?
to
No,
a
no. Here's
separate
the thing. Here's the
topic.
thing. Here's the thing.
Coming
Here's the
back to your
problem.
folktale
No.
Jack.
Well, I'm not bringing up my folktale. Here's what I'm bringing up though. If I want to prove systemic racism exists, I just have to bring up one system. Just how, hypothetically, if I wanted to prove Republicans invade countries, I would only have to bring up one example of where a Republican invaded a country, right? Or let's just say this. Let's just say I say Democrats, right? Let's just say Democrats, they support welfare policies. I would only have to bring up one welfare policy that they supported, and then that would mean that they supported that individual policy, meaning that as a whole. No, for systematic racism, I only have to prove one system, right? I'm not sure where you, like, okay, so how many systems would I have to prove for there to be systemic racism in
Okay.
your eyes? In your eyes, how many systems? 5, 10? And how do you measure that? That'd be my question.
Listen.
Sure.
Listen.
Okay.
So you're saying that
Mm-hmm.
okay, you believe systematic racism is real,
Mhm.
but Ben Shapiro doesn't. Candace Owens
Ah.
doesn't. So no, listen.
This is an appeal to a majority fallacy, so I don't care.
Excuse me. So so if Ben Shapiro wins,
Mhm.
which I'm sure Ben Shapiro
Yeah,
would
Ben
win.
Shapiro wins a lot.
So if Ben Shapiro, okay, so Ben Shapiro won Ben Shapiro's already won on topics of systematic
Mm-hmm.
racism.
Sure. Yep.
So does that mean systematic racism isn't real because he proved one person wrong?
Well, I mean, the point of the debate isn't to prove whether it's real or not to the whole world. It's to win the debate.
So why are we debating it right now?
Because for systematic racism, for me to win
You're
the
trying
debate,
to prove that systematic racism is real.
mm-hmm.
Why are we debating right now if
Because I already proved one system exists and you admitted it, right? Thus making systematic racism real.
Okay, so the debate should already be over, but we're on to another topic.
Well, I mean, you didn't tell me that you lost until recently. I didn't even know I won until you admitted that I won on redlining, right? I mean, I kind of knew I won on redlining, but you didn't tell me that I won, and I didn't really just want to claim I won and leave, because then that'd be kind of a little narcissistic, right? But you didn't tell me that I won until, like, very recently.
Exactly. So that also kind of gets rid of your whole argument.
Wait, how? Okay, for systematic racism to exist, I only have to bring up one system.
No, I'm not talking about that. Okay. You said that you could have just left. You could have just left after you won.
Well, I didn't know I won, so that's the thing.
After you won redlining.
But I didn't know I won.
You already said you knew, but you weren't going to say
that. Well,
no.
Well, the reason why I didn't want to just leave, because maybe you felt differently. Maybe you felt that I lost and you won, or maybe you felt we tied, right? Mm-hmm. But I didn't know you felt I won until you told me that, right? So let's just say this. If we're in the middle of a debate and then I leave and then I later tell you, oh, well, I won the debate, so I left, right? I mean, if you didn't feel the same way, that'd kind of be a little weird, right? But if we both feel the same way, then I don't see the problem with it.
Okay, so if Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden debated, and Bernie Sanders proved Joe Biden wrong on, okay, so let's just say the topic.
Wait, are you saying if somebody wins a debate, it doesn't mean that? No, the point of this is to win the debate, right? Which I did. I'm not.
No, you didn't win the full debate. You won one topic.
Well, no. Here's the thing, though. I only had to win one topic to win the debate because for systematic racism to exist, I only have to prove one system.
You didn't.
Okay, then let me ask you this then. How many systems would I have to prove to win the debate on systemic racism? How many systems? And then what is your, like, metric for that? Like, how do you measure how many systems? No, it's a serious question. How many systems would I have to prove? I already proved one and you admitted it. How many systems?
So, you're still not getting my point.
Okay, what's your point?
What I'm saying is just because you debated a 5-year-old, I'm not saying I'm a 5-year-old, but let's just say you debated a 5-year-old and you won on one topic of systematic racism because he didn't know jack shit about politics or systematic racism. Okay. Just because you won doesn't mean that's true.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that just because I won it makes it true, but I'm saying I won the debate. I'm not saying that it's true. I'm saying I won the debate.
But no.
But no, you admitted it.
No, but earlier you said that since you won, that means that systematic racism is real.
No, I'm saying I beat you on the topic of if systematic racism was real.
Kind of contradicting.
No. Okay, you're misconstruing what I'm saying. I said that I beat you on the topic that systematic racism is real. I'm not sure. Yeah, I would agree with you that beating a little kid on if systematic racism is real or not doesn't make it real or not, right? Just how if like somebody debates you on the Holocaust and then they actually end up beating you, I'm not sure how you could lose, but if they beat you on if it existed or not and they argued not, it doesn't mean it, right? However, the point is they beat you, which is my point.
Okay.
And for the systematic racism, when you're saying I only beat you on one topic of systematic racism, I would only have to beat you on one topic to prove it exists.
No.
Okay, then how many topics would I? If you disagree with me, then how many topics?
You have to listen. You won.
Sure.
You won. You did not prove it. You won.
Well, I won, but I did. Okay, well, all I care about is winning the debate, not proving it. So there. I won the debate, and then since
that doesn't make any sense. And now we're on to another topic.
No, the problem with being on another topic, I can tell you. I mean, we can debate for the sake of it. However, proving systematic racism, I only have to prove one system.
But if I prove one system, then it's not real. So
what? No, because that's a burden of proof logical fallacy. I don't know why you're laughing so much. This isn't funny. Like you admitted you lost, right? And so I proved that a system existed.
I lost on one topic.
Yeah, but one topic is all I need to prove. That means there's That means there's a form of systemic racism if there's at least one system going against them. That proves my point.
Okay. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say that you beat a 6-year-old little kid.
Not that. Okay, yeah, sure, yeah.
And you You didn't actually prove.
Oh yeah, I didn't prove it, but I still beat him in the debate.
You're contradicting two things. You're saying just because, okay, the first thing you're saying, the first thing
Sure.
you said
Yeah.
is just because, or no, you said because I won the first topic, that means I won the whole debate.
Well, yeah, because that's all I would need. Meaning, if I prove one system exists that is racist, then that would prove systemic racism, at least in a small aspect. But it would still prove it.
So you proved the whole scenario. So
What?
okay, let's go over to the 6-year-old little boy.
Sure.
Just because you prove him wrong, that doesn't mean that systematic racism automatically exists. And you're contradicting the two things you're saying both times.
You should be a comedian. You should be a comedian. And here's why. First of all, here's okay. You're saying just because I beat you in a debate doesn't mean that I proved it.
You're contradicting the two things
How?
you're saying. You're like Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or something.
Okay, let's stop with the ad hominems, right? So you're saying I'm contradictory. What am I contradicting exactly?
You're contradicting that in one scenario, okay, in both of the scenarios, you won the topic, but you're saying that in one scenario, you just win the debate. But you didn't
okay. So I see our confusion here. Okay, so you're saying that just because I had like one topic of redlining, that doesn't mean like there's other topics that like I would lose on. Is that what you're saying? Like there's other topics besides redlining?
No, you could lose on other topics. No,
Yeah.
you're contradicting.
Okay, you can. Okay, but okay. Let me just make sure that I'm saying this correctly. Let me just make sure. All right. So you're saying that just because I beat you on redlining doesn't mean I necessarily win the debate of there being systematic racism.
No, because because that's not how debates work.
Okay. How do they work?
On the next topic, that means we tie. But if you beat me on two topics,
oh, I see our confusion. So basically, what you're saying is like I'm taking my win and running with it, saying that just because I won one section, I don't win the whole topic.
yes.
Oh, so I see our confusion. All right. So let me give you. Oh, okay. So I understand. Okay, let me try and make this clear for you, right? So systematic racism. This would be either system or systems in place, right? So if I mention a system and I win, then that proves systemic racism. Because here's the thing for systemic racism, right? For systematic racism, I don't have to prove every single policy. I only have to prove one. Because if I only prove one policy, right, that means there is a form of systemic racism in our government. Meaning...
Yeah, you won, but...
Yeah.
Let's just say I don't know as much as you.
Oh, sure. And I'm not trying to say that I proved systemic racism wrong by debating you. I'm just saying I won the debate. I'm not trying to say I proved anything. I'm not trying to say that I beat, the best arguments. However, I'm trying to say I beat you in a debate. That's what I'm saying.
You have not won the debate yet.
You admitted that I did.
We're moving. No, you won the debate on one topic.
Yeah, but I only need one topic to prove there's systemic racism.
No, you do not.
Yeah. Okay, then how many topics do I need? How many topics? See, this is such a contradicting argument because if I want to prove systemic racism, no. Here's the thing. All right, here's the thing. If I want to prove systemic racism exists, So my definition, I said a system or systems, right? So if I'm not trying to argue with you every single system, and if I lose one system, then that's a tie, right? However, here's what I'm saying: for systematic racism to exist, how many policies would I need to prove?
There's not a certain amount of...
Yeah, I would agree. I would only need to prove one because, and here's why. Let me explain why I only need to prove one for systematic racism to exist. The reason why I only need to prove one system for why systematic racism exists is because if I prove one system is systematically racist, and that system it would go into the part of systemic racism, then I would have proved at least a small part of systemic racism, and we're debating over systemic racism, right? So how many... No, that makes no sense because I only have to prove one system for there to be systemic racism.
No, you're not. Okay, you won.
All right, thank you. That's all I needed to hear. That's all I needed to hear.
Listen, you won the topic, okay? You won the topic. Yes. You proved me wrong with facts because I don't have the same amount of facts as you.
Yep, I would agree.
So that doesn't mean that you proved systematic racism wrong.
Yep, and I didn't say that I proved the systematic racism wrong.
But yes, you did. You said that all...
Well, then I misspoke. I didn't mean to say that I proved the entirety of systematic racism wrong. What I meant to say was I beat you in a debate on systemic racism.
That's contradicting your definition because then you're saying that you only need one topic to prove the systematic racism.
Well, no. Okay, so here, let me give you a definition and let me tell you if you...
Wait. Because systematic racism, if one thing proves that systematic racism is
Yeah.
real, then you win the debate. But
Wait, hold on. Here's the thing. If a system is racist, and then I prove that the system's racist, then that proves systematic racism because it's a system that's racist. I don't see the confusion here.
that, but I could
Wait, okay. Tell me tell me the confusion
listen.
here.
Excuse me.
All right.
I could win. I could probably win the debate if I did more research than you and had.
Yeah,
more
I would
facts.
agree. I would agree.
Just like Ben Shapiro
Yeah.
could beat you in probably every topic on systematic
Yeah,
racism.
I would definitely agree. Ben Shapiro probably could
okay.
beat me, but you're not Ben
So-
Shapiro.
But what I'm saying is, okay, just because Ben Shapiro proves you wrong,
Mhm.
that means you don't believe in systematic racism anymore, and you're not supporting systematic.
Yeah,
racism.
if people beat me in debates, I totally reevaluate my positions, and I'm not even lying on this. Like, if somebody beats me in a debate, then I totally reevaluate my positions. I try to research more on them. But yeah, I reevaluate my positions after people beat me. So, like, let's just say this. I hypothetically,
Well, your record is 35-0, so obviously that's not true because you've never lost a debate.
yeah. So I've never had to reevaluate my opinions. So yeah. But I'm saying
So
hypothetically, if I did lose it, like I actually do polls, right? On my story. So when I do my polls on the story, right, and people vote, if I ever lose like one of those polls, which I've never lost one, and we do this on like there's like some like voting Instagrams that we go through, just because I don't want to be biased. You know, if I put a story, most of my followers are gonna see that. So I don't want it to be biased, but I've never lost one of those polls. In fact, I usually either win by 70% or more. And so here's the thing with this. You're right. I didn't prove systematic racism existed or didn't exist, but that wasn't my point. No, but my point was to beat you on whether it existed or not. Not whether proving it, but beating you. And here's the thing. Oh, okay. I see the problem. So you're conflating proving.
Excuse me. You said that just because you won one topic, this was the first thing you said.
Oh, I know what I get where we're contradicting. So I said, since I beat you on the topic of redlining, I beat you on the topic of systemic racism, and you're finding a problem with that?
You didn't. You did not.
All right, well, here's what I meant to say. Let me reevaluate this. Here's what I meant to say. I didn't mean to say prove in any way. Here's what I said. So if I beat you on the topic of redlining and that it's systematically racist, then I beat you on the topic of systemic racism because that's a system that's racist.
You literally already said that. But
okay, well then that's what I mean in entirety. I said if I beat you in redlining.
I said,
sure.
Just because you win a topic of the debate doesn't mean that you prove systematic racism wrong. But that's what you're
I see okay, but here's the thing. No, here's the thing.
Said, I see the problem 5 times, but you're repeating the same thing.
Oh, I get it. Okay. I see. No, I see the real problem here. So you don't agree with me that if I prove a system racist, you don't think that's systematic racism. You think it's me trying to.
No, because you might.
So is it systematically racist? All right, tell me this. If I beat you on a topic of right, of systemic racism like redlining, right? If I beat you on a topic of systemic racism, thus beating you on a system being racist, thus I beat you on systemic racism because I beat you on a system being racist.
Whoa, repeat that. I'm sorry.
All right, I'll repeat that. So here's the thing. I didn't mean to say prove in any way. That's my apologies if I said. However, what I'm saying is if I beat you on a system that's racist, right? If I beat you on proving that a system is racist. Now, I'm not trying to say I prove it objectively, just if I beat you on proving it's racist, right? If I beat you on proving that a system is racist, then I beat you on systematic racism because I beat you on showing you a system is racist. That's by definition. You can't refute that.
No. Just because I tell some dumbass in a debate that doesn't have enough facts that Adolf Hitler was a great president, or not a great president.
Yeah, I would agree that doesn't necessarily that means you won the debate against a 6-year-old.
Contradicting what you're saying.
Show me where it's contradictory.
Let's just move on to the next topic.
No, we disagree. I don't think there's a next topic because if I prove there's a system that's, I didn't mean to say prove. My apologies. If I beat you on a system that's racist, right? Then I beat you on a system that's racist, and a system that's racist is systematic racism.
But
yeah.
No.
It's not hard to understand. Here's the thing.
No,
if I beat you on a topic of systematic racism, then I beat you on systematic racism because I beat you on proving that. I didn't mean to say proving. Forgive me, master. Right? Essentially, all right. So I beat you. Right, you admit it, right? That I beat you on the topic of systemic racism.
On one topic.
Yeah, but if I prove it, if I beat you on it,
every time.
Oh my
With
gosh. All right, I'm just gonna leave this up to the polls. I honestly don't even care what you think anymore. I'm just gonna leave this up to the polls, right? Because
how are you leaving it up to the polls if you're gonna post it in like 5 weeks from now, because you still haven't even posted the last debate we had.
no, because I'm combining the parts, right? I'm not gonna post one half of a debate. That's kind of weird. I'm putting these together.
Okay, let me just give you some advice that has nothing to do.
All right,
I
sure.
think that we debated on Trump's policies, which I don't agree with anymore.
Oh yeah, Is that the first debate we had where I beat you? Yeah, I usually don't.
No, you didn't beat me on Trump's policies. You beat me on the first part of
Oh,
systematic
okay.
racism.
Let's
No,
talk
listen,
Trump's. Okay.
I think that we tied on Trump's policies.
Okay. So if you think we tied, right? Then here's the thing. So you already know my stance on systematic racism, right? You admitted that I beat you on it, and then you keep wanting to go on to a next topic, but I think a next topic is irrelevant because if I beat you on one.
No, okay, I'm gonna debate you on communism.
No, okay. Here's the thing.
Whenever
Do you want to
you're
just
available.
touch? Do you want to just touch on Trump's policies?
If I beat you, okay, here's the agreement. If I beat you on one topic of another debate, I automatically win, no questions asked.
Yep.
And I prove you wrong about the whole topic.
Yeah. If you give me one, So if you're trying to say like communism doesn't work, and then you
I'm not debating you on communism right now.
Oh yeah, not right now. However, I'm just giving the premises, right? So if let's just say this. So I say that So it's kind of hard to debate theory and then the existence. So like if I wanted to debate the existence of communism, I would only have to give you one country, and then that would prove the existence of communism, right?
No, I'm not saying the.
No. Here's the thing. All right, actually, this is a good example. So here's the thing, right? So tell me if you agree with this or not. So let's just say we're having a debate on if communism exists in America or not, and I give you an example of a communist country, right? And I prove it to you, and I beat you. Did I then beat you on the topic of if there's a country that's communist or not? Because I proved to you there's a country that's communist.
That.
I mean, the answer is yes, unless you're a complete idiot. The answer is yes.
Okay, let me give you my theory. So
right, sure.
if I beat you on one thing, if I show you.
Oh, no, well, it has to be an existence thing. It has to be existence. The whole premise for if I prove one thing is existence, because I only have to prove one thing, and then it exists.
No, because this isn't. You're not proving it exists. You're not.
I'm proving systematic racism exists. Yes, that is what I'm proving.
No, you're not.
What am I proving then?
You beat me on a topic.
No, okay, here's the thing. So let's just say this.
You're not proving anything. And I'm already telling you this just because.
All right, here's the thing. So if I want to, let's just say this. So I'm a scientist, right? I need to prove that unicorns, I know this sounds crazy, but I need to prove that unicorns exist, right? I only need to find one unicorn, and then it exists. Why would I need to get two unicorns to prove one unicorn exists? That makes no sense.
If you absolutely just said to the smartest man about systematic racism, if you proved the smartest man wrong about systematic racism.
The smartest man wrong, yeah. So that'd be Taryn Tao if I proved Taryn Tao wrong on systematic racism.
That means you are then the smartest person on systematic racism, and that also means that you have actually.
Oh, I see the problem.
Proved. Shut up. You have actually proved at that point that systematic racism exists. But when you're debating me, who's only been in politics for, I would say, around 3 or 4 months and have actually only taken it seriously for the past month, made the win.
So then it's impossible for me to win a debate. It's impossible for anybody besides the smartest people in the world to win a debate. So, and then I mentioned in your bio, right? You said you. Well, no, because you said you would only prove somebody wrong on systemic racism if you're the smartest person.
Listen,
sure.
You might win the debate, but that doesn't mean you prove it wrong.
And I agree with you. I agree with you.
The debate. You might
I agree with
win.
you. We agree.
Okay, next topic. I don't even know what you're talking about.
Why is there a next topic? I already beat you on it, systematic racism. I didn't prove it, but I beat you on it. All right, here's the thing. All right, let me
beat me on one topic and if I beat you on another topic.
What? That makes no sense. All right, let me tell you the problem with this. So let's just say this, right? So I'm competing with some.
I'm leaving because there's no point for me to be in here anymore.
So you're forfeiting? No. Here's the thing. Let me just try and convey this to you. I want to try and convey this to you. All right. So this is an existence argument. You're trying to prove systemic racism doesn't exist. I'm saying it does exist. Would you agree that's the premise for the argument? All right, so it's
man.
existence. Wait, hold on. Let me finish, please. Thank you. So we're proving existence, right? You just admitted it's existence. If I want to prove something exists, I only need at minimum to find one of those things. So let's just say this, right? So this, I know this sounds crazy, right? Because this is obviously like far-fetched, right? But let's just say I'm a scientist. I want to prove the existence, right? Because we understand this is the premise of existence, right? I want to prove the existence of unicorns. If I find one existing unicorn, then I would prove that unicorns exist, right? Just how if I find one example of systemic racism, then systematic racism exists, right? Because,
Tell you the definition of debate.
oh, sure, you can, sure.
A formal discussion on a particular topic in a public meeting or legislative assembly
Yeah.
in which opposing arguments are put forward.
Sure.
The only way you can win a debate, okay, you win the debate right now, okay,
Sure.
because I admit that you beat me on redlining.
Yep.
You win the debate right now if you
Sure.
just leave. But if we go on to another topic and I beat you on that topic, it's a tie.
Wait, no, you're
Because-
confusing the things here because you're conflating debates and like arguments of existence, right? So think about it like this. Let me give you this. No, hold on. If I want, like I said, if I wanted to prove unicorns exist, so do I need to prove that one unicorn exists to prove that? I would agree.
That's different.
Okay, why is
Listen,
it different?
that's
Tell me why it's different. Tell me why it's different.
Because if you prove a unicorn exists, no one can just come back to you. If someone else has more facts than you about unicorns existing or not, just because they have more facts than someone else doesn't mean that they can prove someone wrong. But because I'm obviously dumber than some dumb example you gave me of
Sure.
someone who is very smart about systematic racism. It's two completely different things, because when you're debating on it's existing, but it's two different types
Yeah,
of
I understand. So let's we're talking about policy existence, right? So let's just talk about this for example. So let's say I wanted to prove that Nazi Germany or actually no, that's kind of a far back example. Let's use a modern example. So let's just say I wanted to prove that Russia was invading other countries, right? And so these were countries in, everywhere, right? These were invading countries, right? So we would call this an invasion, right? I would only need to give you one country to show that Russia was invading.
That's two.
So I mean, if you disagree with me, if we're just gonna keep disagreeing that you only need one thing to prove its existence,
are we gonna move
then-
on to a different topic or?
no, because
are
I
we
already
gonna-
beat you that a system exists. So no.
All right then.
I mean, I think it was a good discussion. I mean, I think you improved way better from last time, and I think that's really important. Like, just growing as like people. So, thanks for coming out to debate. Yeah, I think you grew a lot since last time.
So automatically.
I beat you on the topic of systemic racism. Yes. But yeah, this was a fun
But-
debate, and yeah, see you later.
Oh.
Haha, bruh, so dumb. Oh my gosh, like I literally cannot fathom the dumbness. He's like, you beat me on one topic. Like, yeah, I only need to prove one topic. If I want to prove the existence of something, I only need to prove one of those things. If I want to prove that Republicans invade other countries, I would only need to prove one country, right? And so the definition of systematic racism is a system or systems in place. I argued the system part. So easy dub. Dub, boys, easy.